Now, the threat of escalation in Iran has put the Gulf region directly in the line of fire. Iran's army says that U.S. forces located on Kuwait's Bobian Island were targeted. Health authorities in Kuwait also report that 6 people have been injured after debris from a missile landed in a residential area. And for more on that, let's go to Kuwait City, where Malik Trainer is live for us. Well, you've been monitoring those developments across the Gulf now. What do we know exactly as to what's happened there?
Well, as you mentioned, we saw from the Khatam al-Anbiya spokesperson saying that they targeted American forces in the Bobian Island here in Kuwait. What we've seen throughout this conflict is if and when American bases are hit, we usually don't hear something from the host countries. This, just a few weeks ago, we heard in Saudi Arabia when the Air Sultan Air Base was hit and 15 people were injured. Confirmation came later from the Americans themselves. So I don't think we'll hear anything from the Kuwaitis as to that. But we've seen a range of attacks across the Gulf. 6 people injured, as you mentioned, in the northern Kuwait due to debris from an interception in a residential area. In the UAE, we've seen attacks in Abu Dhabi, in the industrial city, where one person, a Ghanaian national, was injured. Another attack in the Fujairah area, where authorities responded to an incident at a telecommunications company. And we've seen also in Saudi Arabia where the Ministry of Defense said it intercepted 2 drones. So, as this war continues, there has been no letting up of these retaliation attacks across the Gulf.
And Malik, obviously, where that deadline by Trump is looming, has there been any reaction from the GCC in terms of anticipation as to what happens? How will that affect the GCC even?
Well, I think everywhere across the GCC, people and officials are extremely concerned, right? Because the Gulf has bared the brunt of these retaliation attacks. More than 85% of these attacks have targeted the Gulf. More than 6,000 ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles have been targeted here. We just heard from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Qatar, where the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister had a conversation with the Spanish Foreign Minister, and they talked about de-escalation and that there's no military solution. That there needs to be a space for negotiations, for a diplomatic path. Here in Kuwait, yesterday we saw numerous attacks. Probably the most devastating day in terms of Kuwait. I think what the Iranians proved yesterday is that they can indeed target and hit a civilian infrastructure. 2 water plants and desalination plants and power plants were hit here yesterday. That's extremely critical infrastructure for the Gulf. Here in Kuwait, 90% of their drinking water comes from these desalination plants, so that's a red line yet again being crossed. Kuwait is also the closest to Iran. Just 80 kilometers of water is what separates these 2 countries. It also borders Iraq, where we've seen in the recent week, officials believe that a lot of these attacks are coming from Iran-affiliated groups in Iraq. So there's a real concern here. I think, the call has been consistent: de-escalate the situation. We saw that yesterday the Omanians said they're in talks with the Iranians to come up with some kind of mechanism to ensure passage through the Hormuz Strait. I think realistically, nobody believes that they can come up with a deal that everybody can agree on within the next 12 or 24 hours. But what I think the message will be relayed to Trump is: look, the Iranians are talking. There's talks going on to open up the strait. Let's give diplomacy a chance and let's get a solution that will bring long-term stability across the entire region.
All right, thanks very much. That's Malik Trainer there, live for us in Kuwait City.